welcome to Goodwin Boxing's Ring Talk Show. Myself, Martin Theobald. Joining us later will be Steve Goodwin, and we're going to have a special guest as we discuss vaccines in boxing. So it's been a topic that Steve is quite passionate about, vaccines and getting society back to normal. And we've got someone who disagrees with Steve's view on it. So we're going to have a bit of a raw beef, intense showdown, all those IFL terms, and have a discussion about how vaccines will affect boxing and whether it's right or wrong. So what's happened in boxing over the last week or so? Chocolatito, Roman Gonzalez lost to Estrada via points out in America. Incredible fight. Like 2,500 punches thrown between the two of them over 12 rounds. Insane numbers. Chocolatito maybe hard done by on some of the scorecards. Interestingly, the WBA have suspended one of their judges on the back of the outcome. I'm sure nothing will happen of it. I'm sure they'll be reinstated in due course, and everyone will say it's perfectly fine because that's what happens in boxing, right? But yeah, that was a hell of a fight. And then it's been announced again. Fury's going to fight Joshua and contracts are signed. Quite what's different to what's been announced in the past, I've no idea because we still don't have a date. We still don't have a venue. But we're told now contracts are signed with 28 days to find the correct and appropriate site for the fight to take place. So presumably there's a bidding war ongoing. And it'll end up in Saudi Arabia or Dubai or something like that. You would assume because of the fact that without gates, we're going to struggle to bring it over to the UK or get it to a major... Sorry, without fans, we'll struggle to get it to the UK or a major boxing place such as that. So it'll likely be whoever can stump up the most money to get them there. So we'll keep an eye on that over the forthcoming weeks. We're going to be discussing a Coley versus Glowacki and the undercard to that. In the upcoming show with Steve. And as I say, we're going to go into the world of vaccines. So it's going to be a little bit different this week. Hope you enjoy. We'll see you on the other side. And welcome. There's myself now and Steve. How are you, Steve?
I'm good, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm geared up for some vaccine chat after this. So the boxing portion may be relatively small this week. And we're going to discuss... hopefully keep it to how vaccines impact and affect boxing upon its return.
I'm looking forward to speaking to Chris. It'll be an interesting chat. I mean, obviously, you've got two different points of view. You've got the view of the regular government scientists around the world, and then you've got the other group of scientists that want to participate a different theory. And I always say the same thing before we get into this. If you've got a theory, you can get a bunch of scientists or a bunch of religious people to back your theory up, and you can it's quite simple to do that. But nobody's going to know for sure for many, many years to come.
So we'll find out what Chris has to say.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and shout out to Chris because he's offered to come on here and show his face, unlike certain people that we've offered to come on and discuss things boxing related before that don't. So I highly respect that from the off.
I'm looking forward to speaking to Chris in a minute. It'd be brilliant.
So before we get on to that, let's chat boxing. So from the weekend, did you see Gonzalez Estrada?
Yeah, I thought, who did you think won?
I didn't really score it because, I mean, when you've got 2,500 punches going in over 12 rounds.
Great fight, though, wasn't it? Great fight.
It's amazing. And I just enjoyed it. I didn't score it. I think how can you or I or anyone be confident of who won when there are 2,500 punches thrown over 12 rounds and we can't see what lands, what doesn't land, what touches, what hits glove, None of us can.
No.
I disagree with the judge who had it 117, 111. That, the WBA suspending him is probably a token exercise, but fair play. At least they're doing something about it. So I personally had Gonzalez probably just on the eye test of winning it, but I couldn't say that with conviction.
Just a good fight, wasn't it? And, and hopefully they'll do it a third time. I just hope they were well paid. Very well paid.
Yeah, then what did Hearn come out and say? That he felt bad that Yildirim got paid more than Estrada and Gonzalez.
There you go. Well, then
Then pay them.
Goodwin wouldn't have got phenomenal money, would he? Because he was a token patsy for the fight. So that tells me that they didn't get brilliant money. Whatever they got wasn't enough.
I would imagine. What do you reckon Yildirim would have got? $3 to $5 million, somewhere in that region.
Well,
I don't know.
Knowing what I know about this sport, what he got, what he really got, and what
was declared,
and what ended up in his back pocket would be possibly two totally different amounts of money.
Yeah.
But it would have been more than But I mean, again, at the moment, pay for boxers isn't that great, is it? We know that they're not getting.
Speaking of which, what do you reckon to the Fury Joshua announcement?
Warren's knocked it on its head, hasn't it? Didn't Warren say no? It's not been agreed. I mean, I've been working hard this week, not been paying that much attention. But didn't Eddie announce it, and then Warren said it's not all done yet?
I think Eddie announced it was signed, and then Warren said they had an agreement that nobody would announce anything yet. And I don't know, there's still no date, no venue, but they've apparently signed an agreement. And then Mike Coppinger, who seems to be quite in with MTK and with Hearn,
very much
he came out today saying he doesn't think it will be anytime soon, particularly. On the premise that the Middle East think there's more money in it if you push it back to later on in the year. So given that, to me, felt like a soft landing for the news that people shouldn't be expecting it too imminently.
To be honest, I'm really bored now. Just either do the fight. I'm bored with talking about hearing about. I just don't even care anymore. Just do the fight so I can watch it. I'm not. This will it, won't it, sign, not sign, who's announcing it? I don't really care.
Do the fight or go and do something else. Like, I'd rather you did the fight, but like you can't just hold your careers up not doing the fight. And presumably, if they don't do it now, there's going to be mandatories coming back around again shortly.
Do you not think it gets boring? Wilder Fury, same thing again. It's just boring, isn't it?
Boring. Yeah. Although, wasn't it good to, I don't know if you've seen it or if you've been working, that Felix Cash, Denzel Bentley's been announced.
Oh, they're doing. Oh, yeah, I knew that because I knew that we were chasing that fight. We wanted Linus to be considered for the British, and I thought Felix might pull out, but I was told.
Warren's announced a date and venue for it.
Good fight. Really good fight.
Brilliant fight, and brilliant to see Matchroom Queensbury crossing over in some way and on something with.
Hopefully it happens both. Hopefully it happens both ways now. They'll both start doing. I mean, I know Bradley Skeet once fought on a Eddie Hearn show, didn't he? Yeah.
Derry Matthews fought up at Goodwin, I think, on the Bellevue undercard. Was it?
Don't think so. But hopefully it's the start when they'll interchange their fighters and fighters get the best purses. They do purse bids and fighters get well paid and they interchange. That's great for boxing. Yeah,
I mean, I suppose you would say neither of them are headline acts as yet in their careers. So then whoever loses, their promoter isn't losing a star in terms of losing that fight. But irrespective, two fighters with very high ceilings potentially, and it solidifies whoever comes out of it with a win.
I think the only great news recently that's trumped it is Shannon Courtney v Ebony Bridges for the world title. I think that's the only one that's trumps it.
Yeah, I forgot. Did you see any of the Ebony Bridges fight of the weekend?
No. Is it bad?
Oh, wow. Against 44-year-old Carol Earl over in New Zealand.
How bad is it?
Yeah. There's a reason she's ranked 29th in the world.
Ah, okay.
If you can't take out a 44-year-old former kickboxer who's had 6 professional fights, won 3, lost 3, what are you doing fighting for a world title in your, 6th, 7th fight or whatever? So good luck to Shannon, but I'm okay with the fight. I despise the fact that it's a world title.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the fights are, yeah, I agree. But
The fight's perfectly fine. Crack on, do it. But the world title aspect is, especially when you end up with Hearn doing the interviews where he's like, "Oh, we'll just bin the belts. The belts become irrelevant. You know, they can hold things up. They can do this, that, and the other." And then you end up with that for a world title is mind blowing.
there we go.
Um,
But anyway, going on to a proper fight, Denzel Bentley, Felix Cash. That's a brilliant fight. A brilliant fight.
Brilliant fight. Who do you reckon wins?
Cash.
Yeah. I've picked against Bentley throughout parts of his career, and I've been wrong every time. So I'm going to go with Bentley. I keep underestimating him.
I think Cash is quality, and I think I fancy Felix Cash. But I think it's a really, really good fight. It's not a fight. I'm not dogmatically fancying Cash, but I think he's just got that bit more in boxing talent. I fancy Cash. But it'd be great. I just want to watch good fights, like we all do.
And that's a quality fight.
I won't be watching many this weekend, but we'll be hopefully next week. Next weekend is really good, so I'm looking.
Next weekend's cracking, isn't it? This weekend, Ellie Scotney, our favourite of the Matchroom female fighters.
Yeah. Oh, she's great. Looking forward to seeing her over the second contest, so that's good. Apart from that, on the card, Chris Billum-Smith fights the guy that knocked out Nick Parper.
Yeah, and he knocked out Nick Parper, didn't he?
Cold.
I remember that vividly. He came back off the rope, like he was in trouble, wasn't he? That guy. He was in trouble, and then just came back off the rope, bounced out, bang, massive right hand.
But Chris Billum-Smith is not Nick Parper. He's about quite a few levels above. So in reality, I don't expect Dukar to pose any problem to Chris Billum-Smith. Chris Billum-Smith will know he can have his power, and I expect Chris Billum-Smith to basically get rid of him quite comfortably. But yeah, he has got power, so it's worth watching him, because if he connects on Chris, then the lights could go out, because he hits unbelievably hard.
Yeah, make no mistake. Like he's not going to win a boxing match. He might win a fight.
Exactly. What about Akoli Glowacki?
Akoli.
Yeah, I think Akoli wins, doesn't he?
I think he's too young, too fresh, too awkward. I'm becoming a Lawrence Akoli fan. I'm not sure I'm happy about it. I don't know. I've walked out of one of his fights before.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, it's the only proper fight on the card. Well, the Bradley Reilly Cutler undercard fight's okay, but of the top ones, it's the only one that's I think is relatively competitive.
Anthony Fowler's fighting, isn't he?
But he's fighting. He's fighting a 21-2 with a flashy record. Who only won? I think he only won by majority against Nav Mansouri, the guy that Fowler's fighting. So I think that says it all.
Right. So yeah, I mean the Akoli Glowacki fight. I think, as much as I'm becoming a fan, I'm so respectful of what Akoli does. Not necessarily the style in which he does it, but how many other fighters have gone through those levels as quickly as Akoli has done it, and gone straight into world level rather than hung around that kind of fringe contendership. He's just, all right, he's in at the deep end straight away.
Yeah.
And I like the fact he's doing stuff outside the ring. So he's got his rap record. He's got a book come out. Like, whether or not I'd ever listen to that rap record or buy his book is irrelevant. Like, I love the fact that he's putting himself out there on the line, to be criticised for it, but ultimately that's his goals and his aims and his ambitions, and he's doing it.
Listen, he's a nice fella, and good luck to him. I hope he does well. And to be honest, I think he's improving under Shane McGuigan as well. So great. Let's see him go and win the world title. I think I'd like to see him win. But next week is a lot better. The Frank and the Eddie cards next week are so much better. So I'm looking.
What's the Frank one next week? I can't remember.
He's got the 2 days, hasn't he? Got Friday and Saturday.
That's right, the Friday, Saturday night ones.
I'm looking forward to Danny Bull, Sam Gilly on the Friday night. That's a really good fight. Akeem Ennis Brown, Sam Maxwell, good fight. That's on the Friday. On the Saturday, he's got Willie Hutchinson, Lennox Clark, which is not a bad fight. And then you've also got the Dylan White card for Matchroom on Saturday. So,
Gibraltar.
Sorry?
Over in Gibraltar.
Yeah, so you've got, this next week is quite enjoyable. This Friday night, we've got Maxie Hughes, Paul Highland on an MTK show. I think that's a good fight. And Padraig McCrory, Jermaine Brown, 11.090. That's a good fight. They put really good. Sorry?
Like Jermaine Brown. He's the Adam Martin fighter, isn't he? He's
yeah, but he's taking on Paddy McCrory, who's a really decent fighter. Fought high level amateur, really high level. He's 11-0 as a pro. I mean, Jermaine Brown goes in with anybody, doesn't he? So full credit to him.
Who's on the undercard of the Dillian White show next week?
We've got
Nick Webb got announced, didn't he, against Pfeiffer?
You've got that. You've got the real round the bottom. Yusuf Kamari's fighting against that kid Kane Baker.
Yeah, Michael Mackinson, Chris Congo's on it.
Tez Cheese, great fight. It's a really good card. I actually think it's a good card. Eric Pfeiffer, Nick Webb. I think it's a really, really good card. Really good.
Look forward to that.
Really.
Yeah, but this weekend there's only the one fight. That's a lie. There's two fights. Ellie Scotney.
Yeah, exactly. I like Ellie. I think she's been called out this week. She's been called out this week. I've had a brain freeze. The lovely girl from up north who won the Commonwealth title.
Stacey?
No, not Stacey. I've had a brain freeze. She's brilliant fighter from the same place as Michael Ramabalazza, same trainer.
Pass.
Lisa Whiteside.
Oh, okay.
Called out Ellie Scotney this week.
Oh, nice. I was chatting about Lisa Whiteside with Sam Jones this week, actually.
I mean, that'd be a really good fight. And once Ellie's had about 4 or 5 fights, I think it's a brilliant fight.
Yeah. And then there's Bet Connolly, isn't there, this weekend against Ramla Ali?
Yeah. And Ramla Ali is not. Yeah, I don't. She's no well-beat, is she?
Bet Connolly a chance in that?
Yeah, I think so. I think Ramla Ali wins, but she's not. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I agree with you totally. Bet Connolly has got a chance.
Tough as they come.
Yeah. Oh, she'll give her a fight. You could get a shot there. Could easily get a shot there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have a look at the odds on that one.
The weekend really to watch boxing, but next weekend is the real start. I really want Lawrence Okolie to become a world champion, but next week is the real stuff. But yeah, we're working on a few fights probably going down the line. Linus Udofia was, we'll talk about that next week. He's been mandated to defend against Danny Dignam in a British Eliminator as well. But Dignam's got a fight for the WBO European beforehand, so we'll see whether that comes to fruition. But so that's been come up. Kay Prosper's obviously got his fight in a month's time. Jimoni Camiro still, we're not nailing down the fight with Conor VM for the Southern Area. Adrian Martin's been nominated for a Southern Area title. So there's plenty going on. We'll talk more about that next week.
Excellent. Right. So we're going to crack on now. And we're going to chat with Chris Andre and yourself around vaccinations in boxing. And then next week, we'll be back to review the action from this weekend and do a proper preview of the upcoming ones. And we'll chat further about those bits of news around Linus, around Adrian Martin, Kay Prosper's upcoming fight. But this week is going to be more chat about vaccines, and that's all I'll chat about boxing. So we'll see you on the other side of this. Right, and welcome back to Ring Talk with myself, Martin Theobald. You'll see Steve on my screen, and with us we've got Chris Andre of Chris Andre Boxing. Am I right in that, Chris? Or you'll do a better job of introducing yourself than I will.
Yeah, that's it. It's just I've got a YouTube channel where I've been doing sort of technical breakdowns. We discuss boxing themes. Been doing it for a few years now, so yeah, so you can find it at it's Chris Andre Boxing on YouTube, at Bet Boxing on Twitter.
Excellent. So let's have a quick background. What's your boxing background, Chris? Because I don't know an awful lot about your background and involvement in it. So let's start there.
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, I haven't competed or anything like that at sort of, any sort of respectable level or anything like that. I've had a lot of
That makes three of us.
I've had a lot of family members that have been involved in the sport for many years. My grandfather boxed in the British Army. I've had friends that were professional fighters and stuff like that. I used to do some martial arts when I was a kid, and then I did kickboxing, and then didn't do boxing until I was about 16. And then I had this pipe dream of becoming a pro footballer. So I decided to focus more on that. I ended up failing miserably. So yeah, I've not trained in a very, very long time. But yeah, it's basically I'd have to just put myself under the banner of a fan. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm some sort of a guru or anything like that.
So now your involvement is as watching it, enjoying it, breaking it down for the technical aspects.
Yeah, that's right. It's just I love the sport. It's it's a passion of mine, and from whether you're talking about the small hall shows that really the grassroots of things that make things, make the sport tick really, the real lifeline of the sport, or whether you're talking about the big shows in Vegas or around the world, I love it all. So that's all I am really, just a fan. I'd have to put myself in that category.
I like it. So for those that didn't realise, Steve has his views on vaccines. We're going to keep this very much around boxing. So it's not going to be around society, and that's a far wider conversation. But around boxing and vaccines and how vaccines should or shouldn't be used within the sport of boxing and the implications and repercussions of doing so. Chris came along and commented on Twitter and on YouTube and gave his differing view. So all the plan is to sit here and discuss it, and give thanks to Chris as well for actually coming along and discussing it, because many people make shit comments around things but aren't willing to put their face to them, their name to them. So Chris, we appreciate it entirely. I think as we'd framed it prior to recording, is nothing malicious nor vicious nor anything like that, but purely you had a view on it, Steve's got a view on it, and we thought, let's record it. So I think Steve has kind of given his views. We'll come on to those again later. But do you want to start from your end, Chris, and where your views may differ to Steve's around how vaccines should or should not be used within the sport of boxing, and what the implications would be?
So first and foremost, I do want to say I believe in quite a libertarian approach when it comes to this. I'm not telling anybody don't go out there and take a vaccine. I believe everyone should have the right to do what they feel is right for them. I think that everybody should do some in-depth research and really look into the ins and outs of it. But I guess where I took exception with Steve's comments was, and like I said, there's no malice here. We're just having a conversation. Steve sort of implied that he would be in support of the British Board of Boxing Control not allowing fighters to partake in a fight, because if they have got the virus, they could end up passing it to a fellow opponent. And also potentially with fans not being able to attend unless they've also been vaccinated. The problem with that is that it relies on the premise that if you take the vaccine, you're somehow less of a threat in terms of passing it on, so in terms of transmission. And additionally to that, that the vaccine itself doesn't offer full protection to those taking it. The thing is, though, when you start to really look into the numbers and start to analyze the way they come up with their numbers when it comes to transmission, when it comes to efficacy, it doesn't actually make you more of a threat if you're unvaccinated compared to being vaccinated. And so in a way, it's not based on science when you're cutting somebody out of society or preventing them from being able to earn a living. There's also a secondary aspect to this, whereby there is a potential serious threat when it comes to this particular vaccine. I'm not taking an anti-vaxxer approach, I'm talking about vaccines in their entirety, but vaccines can take 10 to 15 years to develop. These are new types of vaccines. So this is, take the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, for example. It basically injects a genetic code, almost like software, into your body, which is essentially a computer in this regard. And it gives a sequence, a recipe, so to speak, for your body to become a vaccine-making machine. Now, there are various elite level scientists who have been extremely concerned about the potential of what could occur with this. There's something called pathogenic priming, whereby if you are exposed to the wild virus after you get these antibodies, the immune system goes into overdrive essentially, and you end up having disease enhancement, where the disease becomes a lot more serious and a lot more dangerous. This actually happened with the dengue vaccine, where you had a lot of children getting more ill and dying as a result of this pathogenic priming. And the way they sort of tend to test for that is to do something called challenge trials, where they give an animal, they can't really do it with human beings, but they'll give an animal the vaccine. They'll see the antibodies have developed, and then they'll expose them to the wild virus, and they'll take a look at how they react to that. Those challenge trials were bypassed. They haven't been done because, like I said, it takes 10 to 15 years to create a vaccine. And although they say, you know, they're safe and we've looked at it, there are certain time-based trials that you can't bypass. And you have people like, and I'm not trying to go down a conspiracy route at all, but Bill Gates is the biggest investor in vaccines. So you have to listen to what he says. He is the world's biggest investor in vaccine making. And he was on an interview with the BBC. And he himself admitted that if you want to know what will happen to people in 2 years from now, you have to wait 2 years. Otherwise, there have to be certain safety trade-offs. And it's not just him. The Ruud Dobber, who is a spokesman for AstraZeneca, came out and said that they demanded indemnification, which means they can't be held liable if anything was to happen to you for taking a vaccine. And he said, when he was asked the reason for this, he said, we as a company simply cannot take the risk that if in 4 years from now, the vaccine is showing side effects. So they're telling you themselves that they don't know what could potentially happen to you in a few years from now. So when you're asking a fighter or fans to, you know, they must take this risk, it's a bit of a concern, and it's unfair. And you've even got guys who have been, I mean, there's a scientist called Geert van den Bosch. And Geert van den Bosch is an elite level virologist who has worked on the delivery of vaccines. He's worked for Gavi, he's worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he's worked for GlaxoSmithKline. He's, like I said, board certified, written over 30 publications on these things. And he also headed the discovery and preclinical research for these companies and worked on the Ebola vaccine. So this is a guy that is not, in fact, he led on the Ebola vaccine. So this is not a guy who's some anti-vaxxer. And he has put out an open letter. You can find him on Twitter. He's put it on there as well, where he's basically talking about the dangers of using a vaccine, this vaccine, as a prophylactic against a disease that is already endemic. So what can happen in that regard is kind of like an antibiotic. Imagine you were to give everyone an antibiotic for a bacterial infection, even when they don't have the infection. He says that it will only lead to the evolution of the virus itself, or in this case, if you're using the analogy of a bacterial infection, the bacterial infection, and it will actually make it stronger and more deadly. And he's warning that the people that are actually getting vaccinated will end up being the ones that are a threat to the unvaccinated. And because already 80% of the public, roughly, it's estimated, have T-cell immunity, which is natural immunity prior to any antibodies being introduced or anything like that, because of previous exposure to other families of SARS, that those people will then lose that immunity they have. So you've got really people that are not just, you know, anti-vaxxers, but elite level scientists who are warning about the potential dangers. Now, when you consider that only, you know, Johnny Ioannidis is one of the elite level scientists in the world. He's one of the most cited scientists in history. He's the premier epidemiologist. He's a professor at Stanford University, Ivy League University in America. He looked at all the data and he found that 0.05%, that's all, 0.05% is the infection fatality rate of COVID in the under 70s. There was another study out of Sweden which found that in the under 60s, it's actually less deadly than the flu. So what many scientists have suggested, and over 65,000, I think it is now, scientists have signed the Great Barrington Declaration, which suggests that you are the best way to overcome this is to, yes, isolate those that are vulnerable, but to allow the general public to partake in society as normal and allow them to get natural antibodies rather than go down these other routes. Now, to bring it back to boxing, if these risks are all involved and you are sort of demanding that fans or fighters, like I said, I'm libertarian when it comes to this. If you look at the stats and you feel it's best for you, that should be all right. But by the same token, if you're looking at these elite level scientists who are warning you against these things, to then say, you know what, you have to do this, otherwise there will be consequences, I think we're going down a very, very dangerous path.
Right, can I jump in before we go any further? Chris, you ought to be doing promos for boxers. You ought to be out like speaking on behalf of boxers, man, because that, whether you agree or disagree with everything you just said, the way you spoke about it and the passion and the level of research and information, you could do a job speaking on behalf of boxers that don't want to be in front of a camera.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll make a deal. If Steve doesn't insist that I get a vaccine to work, he can offer me a job.
You could become the new MC down at your court. Honestly, I like, whether or not I agree or disagree with everything you said, like I admire your conviction and research of doing so.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's a nice thing to say.
That's all right. Steve.
He talks really well. He talks really well. And no, I think he's done a lot of research, and that's an opinion. I mean, I'm going to come across with I am not somebody who spent hours and hours doing vaccine research, but I just want to make some points. Now, obviously, I'm not going to sit on here and name drop with who I know, who I deal with. Martin knows who I know and what I know and who I've been in contact with since last March. And I knew what was going to happen before it happened. I knew about the vaccines before anybody even else knew about them. So I'm only going to just pass my points in possibly just in sort of a differing view to Chrissy's. So just a couple of things, okay? The first thing, I believe genuinely that science is like religion, that you can find a group of people that will you go and get a viewpoint and they will support that viewpoint. You can get 20 scientists in a room, the best scientists in the world, they're not always going to agree. I mean, even when you get SAGE, who are the government scientific group, they don't all agree. They've all got differing opinions and everything else. And I do think that in reality, we all have got to get back to living life normally. And I do think that's important that, you know, that we have that. And I have no vast opinion on, I mean, we have a situation whether lockdowns work or don't work or anything like that. But what I would say from the knowledge that I do have is that from the scientists that I speak to, who I could also say are world renowned, they would totally disagree with your scientists who you've researched and are world renowned. They've got a totally different thing. And one thing I would say that I don't, is that, and I'd like you to expand on it, is what you said is that those unvaccinated are no more of a threat than those that have been vaccinated. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me, bearing in mind that that we've got widespread problems in the world, and the UK that's going through a big vaccine program are seeing cases drop dramatically and deaths drop dramatically. And I know we're in lockdown, but they are falling dramatically. So I just don't see that. And I'm not told that by the people that I deal with. They say the opposite. And again, as far as the threat of the vaccine, that I am told that, for example, and I only know about the AstraZeneca one. I don't know anything about the other vaccines. So I'm not going to try, haven't done research, but I know about the Oxford vaccine in great detail, and they are very confident, and they were confident before they even last March that they had one that worked, because they had tested it many years ago, and they just adapted one that had already been tested. So I do not believe that having a vaccine, and there's no statistics to show that, does not help the stop of transmission, because I'm told by the people that I speak to that, again, they might be wrong and your guys might be right, but they're telling me that taking a vaccine does reduce the transmissional spread. Now, obviously, that's what I'm told, and that's what you believe, and who's right, we'll only find out in the future. I mean, I'm particularly from a personal point of view, Chris. I'm high risk, so I've been told to lock myself away, and I've been working from my home office for 12 months. So I haven't even spent a day in my office for the last 12 months. So I've actually locked myself away. I've took the vaccine, and I'm quite cool now about, you know, and my view now is that I'm less likely to die as a result of having the vaccine, and therefore if I do catch it and I do die down the line, well, that's life, that's now how it is. But I believe by taking the vaccine, it gives me a greater chance, and all of the people around me say that to be the case, so I've took it. In terms of about the right to have a vaccine, the problem that we've got is we've only got the information that we're being dealt with. Now, you've got your information, and your guys might be right in the end. I've got my information, and the people that I'm listening to, they may well be right. And only time will tell, as you say, who's going to be right and who's going to be wrong. But from a selfish perspective, from a perfectly selfish perspective, if I'm working in I'm told by my people who I've got the greatest respect for that it is quite high risk not to have a vaccine. So therefore, if I choose to go to the theatre, which I will do, I accept that there will be people unvaccinated in the theatre. That's life. I'm hoping that the fact I will have a double vaccine by then will make me safer. But that's my choice to go to the theatre. That's my choice. But in terms of boxing matches, what I was saying was about that was I would have no problem if the boxing board did it. If the boxing board didn't make it mandatory having people vaccinated, then I'm happy to run boxing shows without that either. What I was trying to say is I didn't have an issue if that was a decision that they reached. Not that I'm going to impose it. But the point is, but as I say to you, the information is different depending on who you listen to. But I would rather believe that most of the major scientists in the world, from who each government in each country is following to impose vaccination programs and everything else, I would bet they're probably right rather than these other scientists that are not. But only time will tell. So it's not a point.
I'm going to sit in the middle now to avoid going back and forth all evening over the same, because I'm sure, Chris, you've probably got points back to that. But I'm going to pose a couple of questions now, so we're not here all evening. Chris, would you go to a boxing show? And, well, actually, no, let me start that again. Are you going to have a vaccine when it comes around to your age group?
No. Having observed the risks, I don't believe... and listen, I've got family members who are also high risk. So having, you know, obviously I love them, I care about them, I wouldn't want anything to happen to them. But having observed as much information as I can on their efficacy trials, how they've come up with their numbers to talk about transmission, you know, when they're talking about efficacy, for instance, they said, okay, it cuts death by X amount and Y amount. But then when you look into it and you see that actually they used participants that had a median age of 50 something. Whereas, like I said, in the under, it was 55 was the median age for one of the Pfizer trials. And in the under 60s, like I said, it's less deadly than the flu. So of course, they're going to get statistics that say, oh, look, X amount of people had it. I mean, there was one study where they looked at 43,000 participants. And of those 43,000, they split them into two. And they gave half of them the vaccine, the other half they did not. And of that amount of people, they gave them 2 doses 21 days apart. And they found that of all those people, there were 10 severe cases of COVID, just 10. And 9 were in the unvaccinated group, and 1 was in the vaccinated group. So then you start to say, okay, so does that mean that you're, you know, really 90% less chance of getting it because of those small numbers? What they then did is they looked at them after the second dose, and they found that there was an additional 1 person that was got moderate to severe levels of COVID in the vaccinated group, and 4 in the unvaccinated group. Well, then does that mean that using the placebo, because they gave them a placebo, Does that mean that 2 shots of a placebo halves your chances of not getting the virus? So these things, that it just doesn't sell to me. And there have been so many other studies on vitamin D. And Steve, I hope you look into this for your health, mate. If you're, like you're saying, if you're in the high risk category.
I take vitamin D.
Yeah, I mean, I can't obviously, for legal reasons, sit here and give you any sort of a medical advice, but I will say that they've looked at vitamin D in an endless body of work, and there was one study where calcifediol, which is what vitamin D transfers into after it's processed into the through the liver, but it takes about a couple of weeks. So they did a study where they looked at patients who were in the ICU and were quite serious. They might not have had a couple of weeks. So they gave 2 groups high levels of calcifediol. And the one group that didn't have it experienced 50% levels of requiring sort of intensive care treatment, I believe, compared to the group that did have it. Only 2% of them did. And this was a Spanish study. And if you look at David Davis, the conservative politician, put out a tweet not long ago where he looked at Andalusia's vitamin D policy along the same time, same lines as the UK introduced a vaccine policy. And you can see the fall in the vitamin D policy dropping quite drastically while Britain's raised. This is, a conservative politician who's in government who spoke about this. And Britain at the time had 5 times the amount of vaccines as Spain. And this is something you see consistently across the board. If you look at Israel, if you look at the United Kingdom, you look at Malta, the countries with the highest levels of vaccine rollouts are actually performing a lot worse in excess death compared to countries that haven't had it anywhere near the same level, like Spain, like Finland, like Austria, like Sweden. So what we're seeing,
excess deaths were incurred before we had the vaccine rollout. So of course we've done
right.
that. So that's nothing to do with that's got nothing to do with the vaccine rollout. Well, can I ask one thing? And I'm going to mention people that I don't know here, so I'm not going to name all these. Jonathan Van Tam, Sarah Gilbert from Oxford University, the epidemiologist. Why would those and all of these people in all of the other countries in the top, who are very respectful people, why would they be spouting this stuff that totally contradicts what you say? Because they're not doing it because they're idiots, and they're not doing it because they've got any other. I know that Valence has got shares in AstraZeneca. We know all of that stuff, but these people are doing their jobs because they believe in the good. Sarah Gilbert doesn't do it for real money. She does it because, but these people would say that what you're saying is totally unfounded and untrue. Why would all these people around the globe be saying that? And again, they would have more statistics to come back to, because I'm just saying, why would they be saying it?
So I can't pretend to know the motives of any individual. Perhaps they're just wrong.
I'll talk about thousands and hundreds of thousands of people and governments and scientists around the world. So all of them are pushing this agenda.
So what we see, that's the thing. If you're going to go down the route of saying it's an agenda, then we're talking about there being an ulterior motive. I can't rule out.
I'm just using the word. The agenda is the same, isn't it? Get vaccinated, save lives, protect the world, protect your loved ones, get vaccinated. Why would they all be?
What I would say is this. There was an article published recently, and I can send it to you, where it looked at the conflict of interest that was involved with pretty much all the members of say. I mean, I don't want to say all the members. Like I said, I'll send you the article. A number of them are mentioned here as having a conflict of interest. Now, maybe that's the issue. Maybe there is a question there of motive. I can't comment on that. I don't know. Perhaps they're just wrong. SAGE doesn't have a single virologist on the panel. So maybe they're just wrong. Like you were saying, there are different scientists that are arguing against each other. I've obviously spoken to you about some of the world's elite level scientists, as well as guys that have led the push for vaccines on Ebola. Now, if they were to sit down together and debate each other, well, only one of them could possibly be right. So it could be that the government scientists are simply wrong. When you do look into the data, it doesn't make sense, because like we were saying before, when the trajectory of excess deaths was falling prior to the vaccine rollout, when it then rose within 2 weeks, everywhere where they've introduced this rollout, within 2 weeks of the introduction, deaths rose. Then they fell after the 3rd week. Now, is it because they've fallen because now they have these fantastic, new immune-based antibodies, which, like I said, other scientists are saying those same antibodies could cause pathogenic priming and other issues down the line, and a viral immune escape, as it's been named by Gert van den Bosch? Or is it a case of, it's a coincidence because we are exiting what is a seasonal respiratory season? COVID is a seasonal respiratory illness. If you look at the summer, last summer, we had our cases collapsing. This is despite the fact that 1 million tourists descended onto the narrow streets of places like Cornwall, Penzance and St Ives. We had Black Lives Matter protests. We had protests against Black Lives Matter. We had anti-lockdown protests. None of these things caused a spike. So we know that it's seasonal. So is it just because we're leaving spring, and as a result, whether you look at all these countries that are vaccinated compared to unvaccinated, they're all experiencing a fall? So what is the reason behind it?
That's because in the summer everybody's outdoors, so these viruses don't spread outdoors; they spread indoors, and that's why we didn't get much flu in the we didn't get much flu in the winter either, did we? But that's because people were staying apart from each other and not spreading, so we got much less flu.
Can I ask you one question each? I'm going to interject again. I'm going to ask you one question each based on things that you've said today, because we've only got about 10 minutes left on this call. So
okay.
I'll start with you, Steve, based on things that each other have kind of said and I've picked up on. So it'll be one each. So I'm not taking sides. I'm sat on the fence. I'm Johnny Nelson in it. Steve, do you fully trust a vaccine that you've now had, so you must trust it to an nth degree, that, as Chris said, has basically sped through the process, whereby the one thing you can't do is go forward in time and tell you that that's fine to take?
Yeah.
Let's put about the safety.
Right, so let's go. No, I have no worries about the safety of the Oxford AstraZeneca at all. So I wanted only to take the Oxford AstraZeneca, but when I went there, I had the Pfizer because they didn't have that, so I took the Pfizer. So do I have worries? I think when you put anything into your body that is not natural, it's not ideal. I don't think whether people put whatever they put in. I mean, I've got some people that are the biggest anti-vaxxers that I know, and they're stuffing stuff up their nose every weekend, and yet they're the biggest anti-vaxxers in the world. Now that makes no sense. But no, so for me, I think it's only time that's going to tell. But on the balance of probability, which is what I do everything in my financial world and my life, I believe that that my health is served better by taking a vaccine.
Right.
And that's my bottom line. But is it 100? Do I believe 100%? That no, of course I don't think anybody can be 100%, and Chris can't be 100% on what he believes it on the balance of probability. He believes it's better for him not to take a vaccine.
Right. I'm going to turn the question ever so slightly for Chris. Chris, I'm assuming you own a mobile phone.
I do.
Do you feel 100% safe using a mobile phone, given that there's been not enough time-based evidence to say that using a mobile phone won't fry your brain in 40 years' time?
Actually, that's a good question, because again, you're asking about probabilities and you're talking about the risk of things.
Yeah.
When it comes to a mobile phone, I also take precautions, and I don't want to come across like I'm some sort of hypochondriac, because I'm really not. If I was, I'd be the first in line to take the vaccine.
Are you wrapped in bubble from the bottom down, Chris?
So you're right. There are some concerns with other aspects of life too. And when it comes to mobile phone, I do try to limit my phone usage. I find that when I'm on the phone for too long, for instance, my ear starts to burn. That's not natural. So, I do try to limit that. If I'm going to be on the phone, I'll have it on loudspeaker. I won't have it right by my ear. So we all take certain precautions in life. But the point is, if you genuinely believe that this vaccine is going to significantly cut your risk of getting seriously ill and dying, then it shouldn't matter whether I've had it or not, because if it's for something that's already not deadly, it's not considered a highly infectious deadly disease, even by the government. It's only in the very extreme examples of people that are very aged or moribund. The average age of mortality is above the average age of life expectancy. So when we're talking about probability, if you're cutting if you believe that taking the vaccine cuts your level of probability of getting seriously ill, then it shouldn't matter whether someone else takes it or not, really. And with me, the way I look at it, if we're looking at probability, anybody under the age of 60, if it's less deadly than the flu, in my opinion, if they're healthy and under the age of 60, it makes no sense from like Steve's saying, he's looking at it from probability. So from my perspective, from a strict question of probability, why would I take it? Especially when the government have also put out things that are saying, this is official, they've said, we do not know, and I can provide you with all the links, we do not know how it will affect fertility. So especially for people that are looking to have children or of childbearing age, it would be...
They've totally denied that. They've all denied it. Van Tam, Whitty, all of them denied that.
So what they've said is that there's no evidence for it, but they didn't carry out the studies for it, and it's on the government website. I can send you the link of the government's link to this.
That is different, though, that they haven't carried out specific studies about something to say that it does affect that. That's a different thing entirely, isn't it?
But the reason it came about as a topic is because Dr. Michael Yeadon, who was the former head of respiratory research for Pfizer, so again, another person that knows his stuff, has spoken along with Professor Sukhrit Bhakti, Professor Emeritus at the University of Mainz, who's a microbiologist, virologist, and so on and so forth. They've spoken about the potential for a specific spike protein. I'd have to re-look into this. I can't remember this off the top of my head, to be honest with you, but there's basically a potential of some sort of cross reaction occurring. So it wasn't just something that they just thought, oh, okay, you haven't looked at fertility. There was a concern there, and they've said, right, have you looked at that? Professor Bhakti also spoke about the possibility of it, and they wrote an open letter about this recently, and it's been signed by 12 scientists, about the possibility of it leaking into bloodstreams. And again, studies haven't been carried out for that. So it's not just a case of, I mean, look, one other thing, there's been a study in the UK, in England, in the University Hospitals of Leicester's National Health Service, and 59% because they were concerned about ethnic minorities not wanting to take the vaccine, 59% of South Asian staff did not want to take it. And 37% of people that were Black British. But additionally to that, when they looked at all staff, not just ethnic minorities, 57% of doctors said they would not take up the vaccine. And 37%.
Where does that number come from, the 57%? Because
so I can provide you with I can send you the link for the study itself.
What I'm saying with the links and the studies is that I'm playing devil's advocate here, because I've not done any research other than speaking.
They asked 3,001 doctors, and 1,721 of them said they would not take it.
Who asked that? Who was it?
It was a study by an English study, the University Hospitals of Leicester National Health Service, NHS Trust. I can send you the link for it. So the fact that you have so many scientists and doctors who are also concerned, I just think that, and listen, Steve, I wish with every ounce of my being that the side I'm agreeing with is wrong. God forbid, I'd never want anything to happen to you or anybody else. Like, I want you to live a long, happy, healthy, prosperous life. I've got no interest in being right. I pray to God I'm wrong. But all I'm saying is, because there is a fear of this, I think it's unfair in a way to pressure people into taking something where there could be a potential danger to it.
So let's hammer this out. We've got 2.5 minutes left, right? Steve, would you, if the board say everyone gets their own decisions to make, would you run a boxing show and allow people in who haven't had the vaccine?
Yes, I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem. What the point was, if that was made, then I will run with it. I've done what I can. I protected myself. So therefore I'm doing what I can. And therefore that's all I can do. And that's the end of it.
And if the board and York Hall said you can't let people fight or you can't let people attend if they haven't had the vaccine, then you would go with that as well. And it's not for you to, or you wouldn't challenge and object to?
I'm not a scientist. I'm not the rule maker. I'm just a person that makes decisions on the balance of probability of the people that I trust to give me the right information. And that's the same, whether we're doing with scientists or whether I'm dealing with, I could get you, for example, very quickly, in investments, I could get you 10 of the world's top investment managers. 5 would say one thing, 5 would say another thing. And I could use their names, Warren Buffett and people like that. But I could get somebody else as equally as high in the world of investments that will give you a totally different opinion to Warren Buffett. It's just, if I want to go down a certain route, I can find enough people to agree with that viewpoint.
But that's precisely why, Steve. That's precisely why, because there are so many elite level scientists that are obviously in disagreement. You do have to look at elements of conflict of interest, but also we have to respect also the varying views. And you know, from a sheer ethical perspective, I get you're not a scientist, but from a sheer ethical perspective, I mean, I was hoping, you know, I hope that if there's these, you know, lack of universal truths, elements that we're not sure about, you know, we're in a liberal Western democratic society, and this idea of creating a 2-tier system where you have one group of people essentially being ostracized and not being allowed to have access to public health, or fighters not being allowed to earn a living for their, you know, for their families, when the risk is where the risk is already so low. But additionally to that would be even lower if people believe in it.
I've got to say one thing very quickly, though.
You're about to run out of time, gentlemen.
I've got a 42-year-old client that died. I've got a 48-year-old healthy client that ended up in ICU. I've never experienced one of my clients die from flu or be hospitalized by flu, and that's in the last year. So all I'm saying is, from a personal numbers perspective, I've seen it affect people with children. I've had to deal with it. So I've seen it firsthand. And these people would never get flu.